Well, this morning we are in week 2 of our message series on Moses. Last week we learned about this awful population control plan of the king of Egypt. He felt that the Hebrew people were becoming too numerous, and so Pharaoh commanded that Hebrew baby boys be thrown into the Nile River after birth. Well, at the beginning of Exodus chapter 2, we read about a woman who kept her baby boy hidden until he was about 3 months old. And unable to hide him any longer, she took a basket and she made it waterproof, and she laid her baby in that basket and had it set by the edge of the Nile River. She then stationed her daughter to watch and see what would happen to the baby. Well, Pharaoh's daughter was coming down to the riverbank, and here she notices this basket. It is brought to her, and she opens it, and there's a baby boy inside who is now crying. And she realizes, well, this must be one of the Hebrew baby boys, and she decides to adopt him. Well, the big sister appears at her side and says, would you like for me to go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse this child? And she does, so the sister goes and gets mom, the baby's mom, her own mom, to nurse the child for payment. And then when the time comes, the child is weaned, the little boy is brought back to Pharaoh's daughter, where he becomes her son. She names the child Moses. After he was grown, Moses saw the condition of his people, forced laborers of Pharaoh. He saw one day an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and he looked around to make sure no one was there, and he killed the Egyptian. What Moses had done became known, and Moses was justifiably afraid. Now, last week, I suggested that Moses wasn't just afraid of Pharaoh finding out, he was also afraid of what his anger had caused him to do, spontaneously kill this Egyptian taskmaster. We know how we put children in timeout, this space of solitude, so they can kind of wrestle with whatever action necessitated their discipline. By running away from Egypt and from his Hebrew people, Moses is putting himself in a kind of timeout. Moses enters into a time of solitude, a time that's going to prove quite beneficial in accomplishing the work that needs to happen inside him. We pick up the action this morning in Exodus chapter 2, beginning with verse 15. When Pharaoh heard of it, this killing of an Egyptian, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh. He settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But some shepherds came and drove them away. Moses got up and came to their defense and watered their flock. When they returned to their father Reuel, he said, how is it that you've come back so soon today? They said, an Egyptian helped us against the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock. The man said to his daughters, where is he? Why did you leave the man? Invite him to break bread. Moses agreed to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. She bore a son, and he named him Gershom, for he said, I have been an alien residing in a foreign land. Moses seems to have simply let go. He let go of his dream of becoming somebody in Egypt. He let go of his dream of helping the Hebrews. He let go of his dreams of fixing anything, helping anyone, or even living among his own people. Instead, Moses received what was given. He was offered a home in Midian. He settled there. He was given a wife, so he took her as his own. He fathered a son, and he took the opportunity to name something about himself with more courage and realism than ever before. When his son was born, Moses named him Gershom. The word Gershom means a stranger or exile. Moses said he named the child Gershom because I have been an alien residing in a foreign land. That's a pretty profound admission. He was likely admitting that all his life he had struggled with his identity. Am I an Egyptian? Am I a Hebrew? And he was likely admitting that he had carried a lot of anger about this. The people around Moses were confused about who he was because he was confused about who he was. After the encounter at the well, Reuel's daughters told their father that the man who helped them was an Egyptian. I wonder whether Moses even bothered to correct them when they introduced him to their father. Maybe he just kept quiet and let people believe whatever they wanted. You can't really say who you are until you know who you are. Well, one day, after he had been in the wilderness long enough for solitude to do its good work, Moses was able to claim his greatest pain and brokenness. Now, I doubt Moses knew exactly what was going on in that interior wilderness place. Most of us don't when we first arrive there. But solitude does its good work whether we have any cognitive understanding of it or not. So after weeks and months in solitude, the chaos in Moses' soul settles a bit. He's beginning to make sense of his own history. He is finally able to say, this is who I am. The experience of living as an alien in a foreign land is what has shaped me. I think it's important that we hear the fullness of what Moses is saying. Because not only is he an alien in Midian, but from the time of his childhood through all his years in Egypt, I have been an alien residing in a foreign land. Moses is finally coming home to himself. All of us need this kind of homecoming, a homecoming in which we claim our experiences as our own, a homecoming in which we acknowledge the way that those experiences have shaped us. Please remember that most often, like Moses, we had no say in the events of our childhood. Now, we might feel grief about what had happened, but we ought not move into self-shaming. Well, once we acknowledge the ways in which these experiences have shaped us, we're in a position where we can take responsibility for ourselves, to take responsibility for our behavior today, rather than being driven by unconscious patterns of manipulating and controlling reality. And in the interest of full disclosure, I should tell you that taking responsibility for yourself may be more demanding than taking responsibility of a large organization or even taking responsibility of a family. Yet as difficult as this work may be, it is crucial that we take responsibility for ourselves. For one thing, we have to lead others before, we have to lead ourselves before we can lead other people. And if we don't take responsibility for ourselves, our patterns will get the best of us. A well-known example of this would be former President Bill Clinton. He's an example of how unwillingness to face the unresolved pains of our past can diminish our current effectiveness. And let me be upfront about this. I'm not trying to be critical of the former president. He simply serves as an example of how this dysfunction works. It's widely known that Clinton's growing up years were spent in a home with an alcoholic stepfather who was violent, abusive, and unfaithful to his mother. By his own admission, Billy's job as a young boy was to take care of the rest of the family, to act as a father in the situation. Now, wouldn't you agree that this was a heavy and unnatural weight for a young boy to carry? Yet when asked about his early life, in years past, Clinton insisted that he had a good life and a normal childhood. Well, consider this more realistic perspective that's offered by a psychologist. The perception that he had a normal childhood indicates Clinton's deeply ingrained denial of his youthful experiences. But one must grasp his deep-seated level of denial when he describes a childhood of repeated episodes of abandonment, parental alcoholism, marriage of his mother, divorce, remarriage, his stepfather's death, violence directed at his mother, brother, and himself, his second father's death, gunshots discharged in his home as a normal life. A true description of Clinton's childhood would be chaotic and highly abnormal. This ability to deny what was real and describing his childhood as something it was not, this ability developed at an early age. It's what he needed in order to cope with the situation at that time. However, in the long term, he developed unconscious patterns of denial that did not serve him well as an adult or a leader. When Clinton, as President of the United States, was accused of drug use, draft dodging, marital infidelity, he responded with his deeply patterned denial of reality. And this was disastrous to his credibility and effectiveness as a leader. He was likable, but not trustworthy. It's tempting to sit back and make smug judgments about a leader whose foibles became very public. But none of us are immune to the results of being born as a tender self, of needing to find ways to protect ourselves from wounding elements in our environment. None of us are immune. Some of us are just better at hiding it than others. But we are no longer children. As adults on a spiritual journey, we have a responsibility to name and claim as our own these ineffective and destructive patterns. This naming and claiming is one step toward new patterns that have to be put in place if we're to live into the love, trust, and courage to which God is inviting us. Now, our coping mechanisms and sin patterns might be more subtle than were Bill Clinton's, but they're just as damaging. Here's half a dozen other examples of how our past may affect us as adults. One whose father was stern and demanding, who never heard a full and unconditional "I love you," finds himself on a performance treadmill. It's an unconscious drivenness to gain approval and a sense of self. Or someone raised in a punishing environment with an extreme emphasis on being good. That person develops perfectionist tendencies that keep feelings of shame and inadequacy at bay. The longer this goes unacknowledged, the more likely she is to hurt herself or others with unrealistic expectations and ideas. One who experienced not being wanted at conception or birth learns to doubt his basic self-worth. Patterns of hiding his real self from others develop. In leadership, this person tends to remain aloof and distant. It just seems easier than risking more rejection. The downside is that he prevents himself from entering into authentic community. Someone who has experienced profound loneliness, abandonment, or loss learns to keep busy as a way of avoiding the deep feeling that such experiences bring. She may maintain a superficial peace, but over time it becomes obvious that she's unable to deal honestly with the most challenging issues that need to be faced. One who has lived with significant physical or emotional deprivation in childhood may have developed a scarcity mentality that caused him to be stingy and ungenerous. The emptiness he experienced may also result in narcissism, expressed as an insatiable need to be in the spotlight or to be associated with a person or organization that's in the spotlight. Someone raised in an emotionally volatile and unpredictable environment develops a tendency toward fear and undue caution. She then refuses to take the kinds of risks that are necessary for the spiritual journey. Consider the exhaustion that results from all of this. Remember, though, that these are unconscious reflexes to past reality. It is a work of God's grace if we're made aware of them, as painful as that may be. Indeed, the more volatile and out of control our responses are, the more we can be sure that we are reacting out of old adaptive patterns. Something might happen that triggers our reflexive actions, but most often our reactions are more connected to the past than what is actually going on in the present. Maybe you've experienced being in a meeting with a leader when something is said and the leader, maybe your manager or your boss, all of a sudden just kind of flips out over this, overreacts, and you find yourself puzzling, what just happened? Well, that overreaction likely has much more to do with the past than what's happening in the room right then. Moses discovered what we must all discover. Solitude is the place of our, we'll call it our conversion. In solitude, we stop believing our own press. We discover we're not as good as we thought, but we also discover that we are more than we thought. As we gradually come in contact with our own dysfunctions, we realize our need for security and the ways in which we try to use God and others to get that security. In the context of leadership, this is alarming, but true. When the shepherd is starving, he or she may start devouring the sheep. Let me give that to you again. When the shepherd is starving, he or she may start devouring the sheep. I mean, how many people have quit a job even though they really liked the work, but they felt like their manager was eating them alive? In solitude, our illusions fall away, and we see our competitiveness, our jealousies, our rage, our manipulations. In solitude, we get in touch with our fears. You know, when we're with other people, it's very easy to project on them our fears and negative feelings. In solitude, we have to claim those inner experiences for ourselves. If we stay in solitude long enough, we become safe enough with ourselves and with God to say, yes, this is who I am. This is a yes that says to God, I recognize what I am. It's not a yes that says, I'll remain the same. It's a yes that says, I recognize what I am. Whatever it is that most needs to be done in my life, God, you will have to do it. This is a hard place for a lot of us to be. You know, we're so used to being able to fix what needs fixing, to push ahead whatever needs to be done. In fact, some of us will wear ourselves out trying to change ourselves before we realize it's not about fixing, it's about letting go. Letting go of old patterns that no longer serve us. This is scary. We see the need for change, but we're not sure if this approach will work. And we're not sure what we might lose in the process. It is helpful to remember that all we have to lose is what we don't really want anyway. That false self, those adaptive behaviors that long ago outlived their usefulness, those things that interfere with the good that God has in mind for us. I'm in the midst at home of some house cleaning, physical house cleaning. There's a room in the parsonage that serves as an office. And after 4 years, I've gotten tired of how it looks. I'm on Zoom a lot these days, so I was always seeing the cluttered bookcase behind me. Well, when the meetings got boring, it happens, I was noticing the backgrounds of other pastors' offices, whether at church or at home. And maybe I was just getting bookcase envy. I don't know. And I know that some of those are just designer interiors that are just temporarily the background of the pastor, but still. So I got permission from the trustees to repaint the bookshelves and the walls. So Jill and I, we boxed up all the content of the bookshelves, And I took this picture so that I could remember where everything went. Well, during week 2 of my vacation, we painted, and here's where the house cleaning comes in. Rather than just put everything back on the bookshelves, book by book, I'm deciding what stays and what goes. It turns out I didn't even need that first picture because I don't need to keep all that stuff on my bookcase. So here's what the bookcase looks like today. Yeah, you're not physically with me, but I'm just going to put in your response. Ooh, Jeff, that looks nice. Thank you. Solitude engages us in a kind of housekeeping. In solitude, it begins to become clear what we're clinging to that needs to go. In solitude, God can begin to work change within us. On my bookcase, there's now room for new books and for items that are truly precious to me. In our lives, room is created for the life of love and trust and being led by God that our hearts long for. But before we can grasp these things, we have to put down some other things. And as we face who we are more honestly, we find we are finally ready for an encounter with God. The first leg of Moses' journey wasn't to lead anyone else anywhere. The first leg of the journey was to allow himself to be led into freedom from his own bondage. Before he could lead others into freedom, he needed to experience freedom himself. In solitude, he was able to let go of the coping mechanisms that had served him well in the past, but were ill-suited for who he was becoming. Yes, anger and the need to prove himself through the misuse of power would probably always be temptations for him, but they would never again be his normal way of being. Now was the time to let go of the weapons of false security, to come out of hiding, to make room for something new to come. In her book, Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership, Ruth Haley Brown shares a story that's told by a monk residing in a monastery in Colorado. The monk tells this story. I saw a monk working alone in the vegetable garden. I squatted down beside him and said, "Brother, what is your dream?" He just looked straight at me. What a beautiful face he had. "I would like to become a monk," he answered. "But brother, you are a monk, aren't you?" "Well, I've been here for 25 years, but I still carry a gun." He drew a revolver from the holster under his robe. It looked so strange, a monk carrying a gun. And they won't, are you saying they won't let you become a monk until you give up your gun? No, it's not that. Most of them don't even know I have it, but I know. Well, then why don't you give it up? Well, I guess I've had it so long. I've been hurt a lot, and I've hurt a lot of others. I don't think I would be comfortable without this gun. But you seem pretty uncomfortable with it. Yes, pretty uncomfortable, but I have my dream. Why don't you give me the gun? I whispered. I was beginning to tremble. He did. He gave it to me. His tears ran down to the ground, and then he embraced me. Most of us have a gun, some way of protecting ourselves and making ourselves feel safe. It's hidden under the robe of our persona. It's fairly easy to keep our gun hidden most of the time, but we know it's there. And whatever the gun is for us, it's incongruent with the person God is calling us to be. We know that if the gun were to go off unexpectedly, it would do great damage. Think about how back in Egypt, Moses' gun went off and he killed an Egyptian. We're uncomfortable living with it, whatever it is, but we're afraid to live without it. Sometimes we let ourselves dream of being free, of traveling without the need of packing a weapon. holding on to our self-protective patterns is one manifestation of our unwillingness to surrender ourselves to God, to surrender ourselves to the journey ahead. But there's another desire, a desire that's greater than our desire to remain safe. It's the desire to abandon ourselves to God, to abandon ourselves to the journey that God has in store for us. It's the desire to leave Egypt and journey with others to the promised land. Sometimes we hear God whisper, "Why don't you give me the gun?" God waits patiently. And as we are ready, we give him that behavior, that pattern, that sin that we have relied on all these years. And as we give it, our tears are running down to the ground. At least for a moment, we let ourselves feel what it's like to be free. I want to give you an opportunity to take a few moments to sit quietly in God's presence. Breathe deeply as a way of loosening any tension you might be feeling or fear you might be holding. Allow yourself to settle into your humanity, your own history, your own personality, your own heritage, your own past, and your own present. Without trying to fix anything or figure anything out, just let it be what it is and experience God's unconditional love for you and everything that has made you who you are. After resting in God's presence, invite him to help you start seeing and naming the experiences that have shaped you. What are the patterns underneath the behaviors and situations that are disturbing to you at this time? Are there places in your life and leadership where you recognize that you are holding yourself tight rather than experiencing full surrender to God? Where you recognize that you are not free? Are you aware of hidden patterns or even addictions that are hindering your spiritual journey? Do not allow this time to degenerate into morbid introspection. Do invite God to guide the process and illuminate those areas that are important for you to see and name at this time. Remember that this part of Moses' journey took a very long time, so do not expect it all to come in a day or two. Now go forth and go in peace. Amen.